the morning of November 9th, 2016, I woke up after the presidential election with a voice in my head saying, you have to do something about the political divide. And that was kind of a joke because I had been pretty much apolitical. I was registered with a certain party and I'd always click those boxes, and I never thought about issues. I never informed myself. So I took a very deep dive. So after that, I got involved with a colleague named Rob, and we did presentations on issues. But what I found out, so we do like free speech or immigration, what have you, and we present the landscape, the views from the right and the left, just so to educate people. But what we found out is that people got so triggered and they often doubled down on their own perspectives. And so I started branching out, and what I'm presenting tonight, what I've done since then, is evolve this curriculum, which is more about how do we get ourselves ready to come to talk at the table, because I found that it was really counterproductive. I felt like it was damaging for people to just get really angry at us, at other people in the room, and double down on their points of view. So one of the first, the very first thing we did a big presentation in Medford at the library called How to Change Minds, Including Your Own. And I want to say a few words about changing your mind. I will say more about it later, but what happens is in the bridging world, which it's a very robust, there's about 500 bridging organizations that I'll talk a little bit more about later. And a lot of them say, we're not here to change your minds. And I think that helps relax people, that they don't feel like they have to change their minds. But in my own experience, educating myself and being in various circumstances, I found my mind changing a lot. A lot of times people want to have conversations to change the other person's mind. But a really good conversation can change both people's minds. And it may just change your mind that you don't see this other person as an opponent anymore, right? And what also can happen is that you understand an issue better, even if you still stay in your same initial position. By opening your mind and doing some of the things we'll talk about tonight, you're better able to see really what's going on. I've had people say to me, after coming to my class, this class in particular, that, well, but people have to talk, they get kind of frustrated because they want to talk about the issues right away. But in my experience, and maybe this isn't true of everybody, but it's much better if we're calmer and are less certain in a way. And that might feel threatening, but people who've taken my classes in the long term usually end up saying two things: that they're less triggered in general, and secondly, that they are they realize, and they're happy to say, actually, I don't know enough about X issue to have a really well-informed opinion. And what they also feel is a lot of relief, because I think people feel a pressure to have a position on things and to be able to defend it. And it's really nice when some of that relaxes. There's one other caveat about this, though, is that, and maybe you all know people like this, I do, where they start changing their mind, but they do kind of a 180. So they might move from one position to its seeming opposite, but it's just another way of trying to be sure about something, right? In my own experience, I mostly end up somewhere at the top of that U-turn, just like on some things I lean a little left, on some things I lean a little right, as things are today. So that's kind of a danger of this. But I think the more we can learn to live with nuance and complexity and appreciate it, the better. So bridging, people have asked me for my definition, and it's also called depolarizing, but I will stick with bridging for now. So to me, it's not just trying to get the other side to cross my to my side of the bridge. And it's more than just tolerating new points of view or different points of view. Some people think bridging is meeting in the middle or compromise. And it's true that on some things, especially simpler issues, compromise or meeting in the middle is good. But mostly I see it as comprehending the other side's viewpoint in such a way that it informs and impacts the way I see the whole thing. And we cannot do that if we're not open to viewpoint diversity. So bridging is the welcoming of all different points of view in order to get the biggest view that we can, so we can make optimal decisions and effective action together that will work in the long run. And given that there is not one of us who can understand everything about anything, we need viewpoint diversity. So diversity is a word we hear a lot these days, but not so much viewpoint diversity. People very much stay in their own corners. So that's a big thing that I promote. Also bridging is learning how not to hate someone or a group of people because of who they voted for or who you think they voted for, or assuming even why they voted for someone. Studies show over and over again that more and more people are voting against someone, not so much as having a strong yes for their own, the person they vote for. So this is what's happening. There's not much room in our voting with a two-party system to even get nuanced, our nuances through. So we got to get close as we can to who we think better supports our ideas. The other thing is, not everyone believes that bridging or depolarizing is a good idea. And I hear this a lot. My side needs to win. And my answer is, it's not very pragmatic. And even if your side is 100% correct on everything, which I don't think any person or group is, it just isn't practical anymore. Like we keep gridlocking, not getting things done. One regime does one thing and the next regime just tries to cancel it. So we don't get to move on. Robert Sapolsky is a neuroscientist who does a lot of really interesting work about us and them and things like that. And he says an open mind is a prerequisite to an open heart. So some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight are practical tips of how you can have a more open mind and an open heart and be less polarized and divisive. My big overarching thing is understanding. And that's really what I've found with my own journey with all of this, is I feel like I understand issues more than I ever did before. And most of the time now, I have just working hypothesis, but I have a very loose, a very light touch about where I stand, because I'm always learning new things I never knew about before, things that are being discovered. And we need to be able to understand what's going on. I like that better, what's going on, than truth or reality, because people argue about those things. But we need to understand to be able to see what's going on, but we can't see depth with only one point of view. I mean, if nothing else, knowing how other people feel informs why they feel about things and what makes the whole. So I call that zooming out. And my approach in general is it's fine to aspire to love your enemies and to be compassionate and to be empathic, but I'm really much more interested in what psychologically and neurobiologically gets in the way of being in those states naturally. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. I want you to take a minute. This is from Braver Angels, and they are the biggest bridging organization in the US. I think they're represented in all 50 states. They're very even-handed. They're doing great work. So I just want to take want you to take a moment and see where you are on this chart. You don't have to share it with anybody. Be honest with yourself. There's no wrong answers here. So I'll just give you a minute. What I think Braver Angels does is to give this in some of their workshops before and after. And I think a significant number of people, the needle moves a little bit to our right as we're looking at this screen. I want to tell you, because a lot of people don't know about all this, the bridging depolarization movement in the US. And it seems like a lot of people around 2016 had the same idea, like we have to do something about these schisms in our country. There's a really excellent research group called More in Common, and they did a study in 2017. It's called Hidden Tribes, and they figured out, and a lot of different studies will kind of replicate 70, 75, 80%. Those people are what can be called the exhausted majority. They're people that are more purple, less polarized. It's really, 15, 20, 25% of the two extremes that are really ratcheting this up. More people are a little less ideological. They vote per policy, not just on the right or the left, but what makes sense to them. So it's a good thing to remember that although it seems like the whole country is really polarized and hating each other, it's actually not the truth. But what we get in our media and our social media and even some rhetoric of some politicians really makes it feel like it's more prevalent than it is. I'm not saying it's not a problem. The other interesting study that More in Common did was something called perception gap study. And what they did is they took 6 issues, guns, abortions, several others, immigration, and what they found out is that a significant number of people deemed the other party as being much more extreme in their views than they are. And why does this matter so much? Because we often take strong and at times unshakable moral stances based on misperceptions. I really want you to take that in, because some of the things you might be reacting to are based on a minority of people. And that is, to me, a big problem. And some of these moral stances become like sacred cows. They're unshakable. People won't, it's very hard for people to change their minds about some of their beliefs. The other thing I want to point out is that our narratives, which to me means what we make out of the world, how we think it is. When we have a narrative, what we tend to do is every time an event happens, we run it through the filter of that narrative. I'm going to do this thing. What is done a lot in the bridging movement is, instead of calling Democrats and Republicans, we're going to talk about plaid people and checkered people. It kind of takes the, juice out of it a little bit. But if every time a plaid person does something, I think, oh, those plaid people, all of them are always doing this. It doesn't leave room. Like, remember I said at the beginning, there's no depth with a single perception. We really need to complexify our narratives so that we can really grasp much better what's going on. What happens when we have a series of narratives about other parties or about policies or about problems, they tend to be closed systems, so we don't get any new information in there. Jonathan Haidt, who's kind of the grandfather of the bridging movement, he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind in 2008. He says, every story clues you into certain facts, but it blinds you to others. We all have blind spots. And when we cling on to certain narratives and conviction that it's always true, we will be blinded to certain things. So why should we bridge? Why should we depolarize? Lots of reasons. First of all, spiritual, religious, humanitarian things. points of view, we are all one. So how do we live that? And, the way it gets lived often now is we're one with the people we agree with, but too bad for the others. The other reason why is people find these rifts politically in their relationships, their work, their family, friends, community. And by the way, the things that we're going to talk about tonight, they work in family dynamics or personal dynamics. It's all the same psychology. Like I said before, the people who take my things long term report that their quality of life is improved because they're less nervous, they're less on edge about everything. And it's not us being Pollyanna or ostriches. There's a way to hold what's going on in a less survival mode way. Personal enrichment, and I told you I threw myself in the deep end at the beginning. I would have said no if I knew how hard it was going to be, but I'm really glad I said yes, because I feel as a person, forget politics, as a person, I feel I have so much more capacity to understand and to not get worked up. But the last but not least one is pragmatism, which I mentioned before. I had a friend who was one of the ones in 2019 who believed that bridging was a very bad idea. And she's since come to be involved in local politics. And she's worked with conservative administrations and liberal administrations. And now she calls herself a pragmatist. And she really is very good about working across the aisle. So, because it's the way to get things done, actually. So it's time for something new, opening our minds to new perception of whoever we consider the other. And my work, again, is about neighbor to neighbor and citizen to citizen. So that's why we don't talk about politics or politicians or policies. However, I'm going to out my friend Barbara because she came to me, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, very distressed about current events. And I said, okay, we're going to talk once a month, which we still talk once a month about bridging. And for many months, we didn't talk about politics or anything, issues. And now we can talk about everything. There's not a no-goes, there's not walking on eggshells, there's not triggering. It's like curiosity and like, let's really understand both sides on this issue. And we'll look at articles or, bring up personal stories. So I think that's where we can make a change. I gave this same talk a few nights ago locally in person, and someone says, asked me, do you see any change? Do you have hope at all? And I said, absolutely. At this level, most of us on this call won't be able to affect higher up, except with local voting. But we can start treating each other with more curiosity and kindness, which I think will change a lot of things. A thing I want to point out, I mean, the whole us and them thing is like a whole workshop in and of itself. But I will say tonight, we're wired for us versus them as survival seeking mammals, but we're also wired as humans to collaborate and cooperate. And so some of this work is, how do we move the needle from us and them and being on opposite sides and whatever the other side says I'm going to say no to really start working together and get things done. Reconciliation is difficult when one or both sides are certain of the absolute righteousness of their cause and the irredeemable vileness of the other side. So I'll tell you a story. I was involved for about 18 months with a think tank, and they were having these trainings, and I won't mention the names. They called themselves nonpartisan, but they were quite partisan on the left, as it turns out. And so these groups were working on local, non-political things like, how do we get more people to come to the library, or how do we get more people to move into our little town? Yeah, it shouldn't be political, but they were having trouble getting conservatives into their their meetings. And part of the thing is, in what we learned is that when you're trying to solve a problem, you need all the stakeholders, all the people concerned, you need to be at the table. So anyway, long story short, I'm politically homeless, but I can take the strong points of any position, and talk about them. And so I said to one of the projects, I said, well, if I were a conservative, I wouldn't come to that thing because of the way you language this. And that's languaging is a big problem. So that night at the dinner, this woman comes up at me and she said, when you said you were conservative, the whole room bristled. And I said, well, first, I didn't say I was a conservative, but that's interesting. And then the next day, some of the people were saying, well, how do we get conservatives? And I said, well, I was told that the whole room bristled yesterday. And if you were one of the people bristling, that's where you start. Because if you are polarized within, and I'm going to do a shout out for Braver Angels, they do a great, great, great workshop inline and on person called Depolarizing Within. If you are so torn up and polarized inside of yourself, it's not going to be very possible to build bridges or depolarize. So where do we start? So what we're going to talk about tonight is changing some of our habits of mind. And I used to get a lot more conceptual on this presentation, and I really wanted to make it that you'd have takeaways that are fairly simple to do. So one thing I will say about all of these things, our nervous system are set up to detect what we feel are threats. And when we have kind of bought into the idea that if certain people get into office, it's going to be the end of the world and those kind of things, it's really hard to start changing our minds. But in the beginning, when I was exposed to a lot of different ideas, I got very anxious. I call it wobbly, just because it was like, if I'm wrong about what I've always thought, what if I'm wrong about everything? I just really want to say to you, these things are simple, these things I'm going to talk about, but they can be hard on our nervous systems. And people who've been in therapy who start changing, it's the same kind of thing. It's hard to switch, but it's really worth it. And we can move beyond our knee-jerk fight or flight responses, for sure. I like this slide. Reflect, rethink, and revise. So there's a great book, Adam Grant, Think Again. And I like books that aren't highly academic. This man is very readable and very smart. So he says there are deeper forces behind our resistance to rethinking. Questioning ourselves makes the world more unpredictable. Our nervous systems do not like that. It requires us to admit that the facts may have changed, that was once right may now be wrong. Reconsidering something we believe deeply can threaten our identities, making it feel as if we're losing a part of ourselves. Now, what's also true is that some of us have tended to wrap our identities around positions on issues or political parties. So when people who have changed and really, as Brene Brown would say, left their ideological bunkers, they can feel very wobbly, like they don't know if they belong, they don't know who they belong with. They may actually, as they start to change their ideas, get pushback from their friends. But it's really important. I think it's crucial that we become critical thinkers, and we can't if we're too ideological and too threatened. Here's two quotes that I love. It takes considerable knowledge just to realize the extent of your own ignorance. And some problems are so complex that you have to be well-informed just to be undecided about them. I've really felt that. And that I feel like it's more honest and relaxing, as I said before, just to not have to have an opinion about anything. So these new habits of mind will eventually become second nature and a new baseline, and our nervous systems do grow into it. And when you're surrounded by people also who are like me and Barbara, like where we can talk about everything in a very we're not trying to win an argument. We're not trying to push our points. We're really trying to understand. But if we would get too anxious about it and threatened, we wouldn't be able to do that. So one of the things we're built to do, this is the kind of neurobiological part of it, we're built to shortcut. We get way too much information. We need to save energy and make quick decisions. So they're very useful, except when they're not. And in politics, they're not. Letting go of our ABCs, assumption, biases, and certainty. So one of the things that, if I could wave a magic wand, this is the first thing I would do, is for people to stop stereotyping about any groups, but we're especially talking politics tonight. So for example, I've met Democrats that are strong second rights amendment people. I've met conservatives that are pro-choice. I've met Democrats that are pro-life. Just because we think we know who people voted for does not tell us very much about them. And when we say, for example, plaid people are bigoted, when we don't put a qualifying word in there, the assumption is all. When I say plaid people are bigoted, it sounds like I'm saying all plaid people are bigoted. But a thing that you can start doing right now is to add qualifiers when you're saying things like that. Like some plaid people are bigoted, or even if you use words like many is different than all, or some. So the stereotyping really dilutes complexity, and we are all complex. And it's really easy to make these shortcuts and assumptions and be wrong. What's more interesting is, what don't you know about me? Oh yeah, I also worked with a guy who was a Trump, worked on Trump's campaign and everything, and he himself was for all open borders. So we can't know much about people just from who we think they voted for. Another really basic thing psychologically that we are wired, this is, not a flaw. It's something called psychological splitting. People would call it either or thinking or black or white thinking. And it's a shortcut. It's a way of simplifying the world, because nuance is hard to deal with. It's such things as I'm right, you're wrong, my team's good, your team's evil. Zero-sum game means that one side wins and the other side loses, instead of trying to make more win-win solutions. So part of the thing that I encourage is to nudge ourselves towards nuance. And again, the tip to say some instead of all. But a man at one of these recent talks, he comes up to me after the talk and he says, I like black and white thinking. It's easier. And I said, that's the point. We will always go to the course of least resistance unless we are being mindful, as they would say, or being thoughtful about what's going on inside of us. What's a really good exercise, if you're able genuinely to do that, is to start saying, on one hand, X, on the other hand, Y. It starts developing this way of being really expanding your capacity to understand. And it really is a superpower. Nuance is not wishy-washy. It's not avoidance. It's really more accurately seeing what's really going on. So media, that we could do a whole week-long workshop on that, but I do want to give you a little exercise. So see what the man is doing with his hands. So make a little frame wherever you are and just pick a place in the room, in your room, and kind of make a mental note of what you're seeing and what story you might make up about it. And then move over, do a 90-degree or 180 and see something else. And if you were making a story up about those two different views, they may be completely different stories. Now, Journalists know this, documentary filmmakers know this. It's like really sometimes what's most important is what's being cut out. So just remember that usually we're not getting the whole picture. Sometimes we just can't, but it's different thinking that you know the whole picture and knowing that you don't, but you're not even sure what that is. But you see, it's a whole process that you have to be calm enough in yourself to be able to tolerate uncertainty. Here's a framing thing that I think is really helpful to understand. This is how language is used to manipulate. So, for example, as many as 10% of people lose weight on program X, or as few as 10% of people lose weight on program X. The statistic is exactly the same, and the statistic might be true also. But by having these qualifier words, so qualifier words can be good or bad, as many is encouraging you to, sign up for the program, but as few as saying it's not worth it. It's like a critique, right? But you have to be kind of savvy, or especially if you're only reading one news source, there's a lot of framing going on and a lot of things. I think sometimes it's not so much misinformation as just one side of a story that we're getting. So I'm going to make a big shout out to Tangle. This is a news and opinion source online. The man's name is Isaac Saul. He was in mainstream media until 6 or 7 years ago, and then he started Tangle. And he's very even-handed. He probably leans a little left, but then some people think he leans a little right. We all have a bias. It's not about not being biased, but it's about checking for it. But for me, he really calls it as he sees it. He is critical of either side, and he gives credit to either side. And that's when I trust in my journalists. If they can be critical of their own side and to give credit to the other side, I know they're not ideological or not being run by their ideology. They're really seeing things, they're zooming out. So Isaac Saul has I think every three times a week, he sends out something. He takes a hot issue. He gives a 15-minute read, kind of a breakdown of the issue with lots of hyperlinks, 3 views from the right, 3 from the left, and then his own take. And then he's got a very diverse politically staff. So they'll say, I agree with Isaac on this, but not on this. And it's just for 15 minutes. And people who have started reading that I've recommended them to, they really love it. It's very calming because he's not an outrage machine. When people say to me, oh, I'm diverse, I listen to MSNBC and I listen to Fox News, I just say those are both outrage machines. So that's my pitch for Isaac. The other thing we need to know about how we work as humans is that we have something called a negativity bias. And if you consider that, as survival seeking mammals, we're scanning really constantly, unconsciously, for potential danger. So that dangerous seeming things will have more weight. So even if they're just perceptions rather than a reality, they'll carry more weight. So when we're in this 24/7, 365 news cycle, what's happening is this whole thing is getting ratcheted up. And that's a nervous system thing too. With these news cycles, they have to fill up time. Not in the old days where we watched Walter Cronkite for an hour a night and called it good. This is 24 hours a day, and they have to fill it up with something. So they repeat the bad news. So it seems either more prevalent or more threatening. And here's an example. Some of you might remember when this started. I did as a kid. On milk cartons, they thought it would be a good idea to show these missing kids. So every morning, you're looking at this milk carton with these same few faces. And this is what started parents being more helicopterish parents, like overprotective, because this is happening every day. And, this could happen to my children. And also studies robustly show that most kids are kidnapped by people they know or their family. It's not often strangers. So this is a way that this repetition of negativity keeps it really forefront in our minds and anxious. Here's another tip that all of you can do starting now, if you choose. Some of you might know Charles Eisenstein. He's a thinker. I think he leans left. Next time you post online, check your words to see if they smuggle in some form of hate, dehumanization, snark, belittling, derision, some invitation to us versus them. And notice how it feels kind of good to do that, like getting a fix. So when you are sharing information, first of all, make sure that it's true, because a lot of times, I know now I don't share much, but I would get triggered and think, oh my God, and the world needs to know this, and push send and share. And now I realize I don't even know if those things are true. So there's that. And asking yourself the question, if you believe bridging is a good thing, some of you on here might not think it's a good thing. That's okay too. But if you do think it's a good thing, a question to ask yourself before you do something is, are you contributing to polarization and division, or are you reducing it? There's a great quote that I can't find who said it, but it goes something like, if all you do in this world is not create more chaos and confusion, you are doing the world a great service. Here's the other thing about, I said I often now on issues I don't know, but really closer to what's true is that I have a system of a working hypothesis, which is basically based on what I know up till now, I think X. And I don't know, it's not every day, but so often I just read another piece of information that I didn't know, which is like, oh, I've landed one place yesterday, but now I think a little bit differently. And so I don't need so much to have a conviction of my opinion. I love this quote, date ideas, don't marry them. And I'd said this before, I don't know enough about X to have a well-informed opinion about it. When we do this, I also think we're modeling for other people how not to dig in and double down on their opinions. It's okay not to know everything. In fact, it's more realistic. Other things that are really great responses are, it's complicated, it depends. And so, with my working hypothesis idea, I'm also poised to pivot. So I like these alliterations, nudge myself towards nuance and be poised to pivot. So I'm not going to be able to see people's hands, but you'll know. So who here in this room has never been wrong? And who has never changed their mind? So usually there's one person who raises their hand, and everyone laughs. Of course. And why is it so awful to admit we're wrong? I think a lot of it has to do with shame, early shaming, but also the wobbliness of, like, when I started doing this work, like, if I'm wrong about this, I'm wrong about everything, but it's okay to be wrong. It's a human thing. And then somebody in a recent group, I really like this. We were talking about right or wrong. I don't like those words because they're two things, like right or wrong morally and right or wrong factually. But I've started saying the word mistaken. I think that has a lot less charge than wrong. And languaging is really important, I think, especially in delicate situations. So I want to talk about humility here. And I mean by that, both moral and intellectual humility. David Brooks said, humility is the awareness that there's a lot you don't know, and that a lot of what you think you know is distorted or wrong. And I love that. I am a big fan of his. I want to show you this little clip. You may have to adjust your own volume. However, it's all captioned too. So this woman, Catherine Schultz, she wrote a book on being wrong. And I used it as a textbook for a class at SOU I taught called Exploring Right and Wrong Through Film. It's a great book. Again, it's not academic, but very, very helpful. Lots of examples. So I will play it now. Oops.
Think for a moment about what it means to feel right. It means that you think that your beliefs just perfectly reflect reality. And when you feel that way, you've got a problem to solve, which is how are you going to explain all of those people who disagree with you? It turns out most of us explain those people the same way, by resorting to a series of unfortunate assumptions. The first thing we usually do when someone disagrees with us is we just assume they're ignorant. They don't have access to the same information that we do, and when we generously share that information with them, they're going to see the light and come on over to our team. When that doesn't work, then we move on to a second assumption, which is that they're idiots. They have all the right pieces of the puzzle, and they are too moronic to put them together correctly. And when that doesn't work, then we move on to a third assumption. They know the truth, and they are deliberately distorting it for their own malevolent purposes. This attachment to our own rightness causes us to treat each other terribly. But to me, what's most baffling and most tragic about this is that it misses the whole point of being human. The miracle of your mind isn't that you can see the world as it is. It's that you can see the world as it isn't. We can remember the past, and we can think about the future. We can imagine what it's like to be some other person in some other place. And we all do this a little differently, which is why we can all look up at the same night sky and see this, and also this, and also this. And yeah, it is also why we get things wrong. If you really want to rediscover wonder, you need to step outside of that tiny, terrified space of rightness and look around at each other and look out at the vastness and complexity and mystery of the universe and be able to say, wow, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
Certainty. Certainty is the conviction that I cannot possibly wrong. And when you think about it, it's only the closed mind that is certain. Like before, I was talking about how things become a closed system. No new information can get in. Our nervous systems really love to feel certain, even if we're wrong. And having the capacity to be comfortable in uncertainty and not knowing is, I think, a virtue and a real superpower. I mean, again, everything that we've talked about would help in family relationships, work relationships. This is not just about politics. Adam Grant had this in his book, which I love, like the things that I know are so little, and the things I don't know are so vast. So we need viewpoint diversity to fill us in about what we don't know. These are the shortcuts, the many ways our minds play tricks on us. And I think this is all those little phrases in there. It's 188 ways that we have automatic cognitive shortcuts, biases. With good reason, we get so much, we need to know, okay, what should we remember? And what if we need to act fast? And what if there's too much information that we have to weed it out? And sometimes we don't weed it out very well. And if there's not enough meaning, this really gets us into trouble. We will make up meaning. We're meaning-making mammals. And so we like to constantly make sense of the world. And often we come up with the wrong conclusions. Some of you know this story about the blind man and the elephant. So they were asked to define an elephant by the small bit that they could grab onto. As we see, a rope, a snake, a wall. And I tell you that we are all the blind people. We are all getting just one bit. Some of us have a little more bandwidth than others, but that's why we need people to show us what we're not seeing, what we're missing. That's a really good question to ask ourselves. What am I missing here? Because it will always be something. It's no longer a question of what I'm seeing. No, we all know that's not reliable. I don't know if you all have ever heard the eyewitness studies that, they're not reliable. The real question is, what am I not seeing? We all have blind spots. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. We project with those narratives or whatever our past experience or history, we project that on the outside world, and then we interpret things that way until we get a little more free of our biases and really listen to other people's points of view too. Confirmation bias, many of you probably know what that is. It's our built-in capacity to embrace the facts that already confirm what we already believe. And disconfirmation bias is when we reject, often out of hand, whatever would be contrary to that. I had a class years ago. I showed a lot of film, did a lot of film classes, and I showed a documentary, and that was controversial. It was not a point of view that many people in the room agreed with. And so a woman comes up to me after and says, that film was biased. And I said, every film is biased. I said, but I bet if you agreed with what the film was about, you wouldn't say it was biased. Right? And the thing is, it's very easy to see, studies have shown, it's very easy to see somebody else's bias, but not our own. Again, we need other viewpoints to show us what we're not seeing. Engaging viewpoint diversity counteracts our confirmation bias. Malcolm Gladwell is a contemporary writer. Maybe some of you know his essays, very interesting man. He says, I feel I change my mind all the time. And I sort of feel that's your responsibility as a person, as a human being, to constantly be updating your positions on as many things as possible. And if you don't contradict yourself on a regular basis, then you're not thinking. One thing I realized when I started this work 8 years ago is that opinions that I had solidified over time, I had formed them 20, 30 years prior and never gotten the upgrade. So I think it's a good thing to point out. These are some help with language. I've started using, I've come to a different conclusion instead of I disagree with you. I think it's a way, it's a softening of language without pandering or losing meaning. And there's certain things that when we hear, we seize up, if someone says, I disagree with you, I can't help but have a little knee jerk, right? But if somebody says, I came up with a different conclusion, I think it's easier to hear. The other thing you can do is you can listen without forming a rebuttal. So many of us have learned how to sit quietly and let the other person speak, but very few of us are really listening. We might say, just be waiting for the person to take a breath in so we can say yes, but, or tell them why they're wrong and we're right. So that's a really important thing to do. And really this idea of being curious, that they do talk a lot about in bridging circles. It's hard to be curious when you're triggered and feel threatened by an opposing idea. So again, this idea of calming our nervous systems down so we just really are more devoted into trying to understand what's going on than have a firm point of view and try to convince somebody else of it. The word yes and instead of yes but is a really good tool. This is something that a lot of people do, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, meaning throwing something away, just one thing that somebody might say, throwing the whole thing out just because you disagreed or didn't like the whole thing. And my story is that someone had come to one of my classes and written me an email afterwards and said, I really, really loved your class until you quoted so-and-so. And then you lost me, and I've never seen him back in the class again. And it's just, there's a lot that gets thrown out. I want to just do a quick word about empathy. We tend to think of that as always a positive thing. I do a class on empathy, and it's very powerful. First of all, it's a two-edged sword, and which means, like, there's a film that I show in that class, a little short by Robert Sapolsky about us versus them. And he said, so oxytocin is like the bonding drug, like the mother-infant hormone. And he said, so you'd think if everyone just spritzed some of that, it would all be kumbaya and everyone would get along. And he said, but no, what happens is they become more mergy and empathic with a group or a loved one, or, a group of people. But anyone that they consider a threat to that group, they get less empathetic with them. So the point is, in this work, all boats must rise, not just the people you think deserve it, or that are like you, or that you feel have been wronged. Often the people who have been pointed out as doing the wrong have their own wrongs have had been done to them. So it's really important to get out of the way of just the spotlight of empathy. Empathy is really good for honing in. It's not very good for zooming out. And I want to do another class like this in January, and I will talk about that, zooming in and zooming out. So there was one woman who came to my long-term class, and in the end, she said, I realized in trying to be fair to one group, I was being unfair to another. And that's, to my point, all ships need to rise. And it also helps me to remember that the person I'm in front of me wants to feel safe, no matter if they're acting angry or, combative. So however they might be expressing it, when we're reactive like that, we're just trying to feel safe. I mean, it may come out as counterproductive, but it really helps me understanding that about people in front of me. Another trap is contempt prior to investigation, which does, it's like part of disconfirmation bias. It's invalidating other points of view without even considering them. And this can happen in a couple, at work, at school, anything like that. So I want to end with this. This is Arthur Brooks, who was the head of a conservative think tank. He's a conservative, and he wrote a book. I can't remember the title of it, but it's a bridging book. So
we don't have an anger problem in American politics. We have a contempt problem in politics. Contempt is defined by social psychologists as the utter conviction of the worthlessness of another human being. If you listen to people talk to each other in political life today, they talk to each other with pure contempt. When somebody around you treats you with contempt, you never quite forget it. So if we want to solve the problem in polarization today, we have to solve the contempt problem. I sometimes write with the Dalai Lama. I was thinking about this contempt problem. I said, Your Holiness, what do I do when I feel contempt? And he said, practice warm-heartedness. And I started thinking about it, and it's true. When I do that, when we do that, when we have leaders who can do that, it's utterly world-changing. Catch yourself. You can show true strength if next time you hear contempt, you answer with warm-heartedness. Every single one of us is going to have an opportunity on social media or in person to answer somebody's contempt. Are you going to do it the right thing and make the world a little bit better and show your strength and make your enemies your friends? Or are you going to make the problem worse? That's a question each of us gets to answer probably in the next 24 hours.
I want to say two things. One is I really, really loved the picture exercise. Just in my little house, just doing this, I was like, God, I'm a really messy person lives here. And then I moved it over and this gorgeous quilt on the wall. And I was like, wow, that person is so organized and specific and it's so beautiful. It was just brilliant. So I love that, and I'll take that with me as a way to think bigger and about, maybe I'm just feeling the tail of the elephant, like it's just the rope. No, there's a bigger picture. And then my question is, I wonder if you or someone else could give an example of uh just an example of how do you practice warm-heartedness when you view contempt? Like, can someone give an example of that? Like, I'm just like, what is that actually? Is there like can you think of an example, a phrase or something?
Well, so it's interesting because as much as I really appreciate Arthur Brooks, this is one of these things where you can aspire, right? But for me, what's more interesting is what gets in the way of like a natural human response of not being contemptuous or being kind. So I'm going to open it up for in the floor for in a second, but I'm just thinking, I mean, I know you have examples you're thinking of, and it's why, maybe this question is something like, why am I not finding any kindness in this moment? Like, what's triggering me? But does anyone else have something to say about this? But I think that's the thing. When I get triggered, it's like, what it's getting in the way, right, of this relationship. And so it's like, what is bothering me about it? It can be, this person reminds me of my stepmother who had a certain tone with me. Like, it can be that personal too, or it can be like, right, I feel like if that person who he voted for wins, it's going to be the end of the world. It's also looking like, what's triggering you? What's underneath the feeling of contempt?
The things that just really spoke to me tonight were about, we all have blind spots. And instead of what are we not seeing, what am I not seeing? And I really liked the person that came up with, or that just shared, how did you come to that conclusion? How, just ways to non-threateningly break into a conversation or elicit somebody else's response so I can come to understand better. Because that seems to be one of the things, um, I don't want to come out with, I disagree with you. It's just I've come to a different conclusion. How, and how can I understand your position better? How did you get there?
Mhm.
So that they know that that I'm trying to understand where they're coming from. And the ideas that came up tonight were very helpful for me, in that area.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
And you can see, I think you can start to see, if I'm anxious and I'm feeling threatened, it's going to be hard for me to do all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do I legitimately, not dissociate, but legitimately say, I'm safe, I'm fine. Nothing bad's going to happen to me in this moment. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I have learned so much about other people and positions. I mean, I started on the left and now I'm, homeless, really politically homeless. But
Uh-huh.
when I started really understanding more conservative viewpoints because they weren't threatening to me, I thought, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way. That is a
Yeah.
really good point. And it started changing the ways that I viewed problem solving politically.
Yeah.
So, but this thing, the nervous system, I think, uh, if it's not the linchpin, it's a main linchpin in trying to understand the other and trying to actually maybe, have them change your mind and have them change your heart.
Yeah. At least come to understand someone so that you can maybe we'll never get over that those differences of opinions in say politics. But if I can understand a person in another area, I'm still treating them as a human being. I'm appreciating them as a person, and that's critical.
Hi there.
Hi.
So thank you very much for everything this evening. It's really been the best.
Aw.
And so I wanted to thank you for that to begin with. One of the things that for me, because I always want to go into debate mode and instead of listen mode, in most
Yeah.
cases, is to think about what it really takes to have intellectual courage. And that means I learned something, am I willing to unlearn it and then relearn it with an open and flexible mind? And if I can bring that into my being, it not only helps with the emotions that are around everything, but it allows me to ask questions when I'm in those situations.
That's beautiful. And you're
Mhm.
reminding me of something that Jonathan Haidt wrote about. He said that we're wired to be attorneys, lawyers, to debate and to win, even if we're manipulating and changing the facts a little bit. But you know, the word debate has had a bad rap because in and of itself, it would be great to think that people come together to talk about something, to try to understand it better.
Yes.
But do that sometimes by having, it's like science too. There's a thesis, a theory, and people push against it to see if it holds up, you know, but could we change a different, I think with debating in the past, maybe it wasn't always this way, but it's about winning. It's about convincing somebody instead of, can we understand this issue or problem better together by looking at all the parts of the elephants that we have?